Saturday marks 1 year since nursing student Laken Riley was found dead on the campus of the University of Georgia. Since then, a 26-year-old undocumented immigrant has been convicted of her murder, and President Donald Trump has signed the Laken Riley Act. Atlanta News First is taking you back through the changes that have come since that gruesome day and the nationwide impact it is having today.
February 22, 2024, a Ring camera captures Laken Riley leaving her house for a morning run. Hours later, her roommates call 911 when she doesn't return home. Campus police swarm the wooded trails on UGA's campus and find the 22-year-old nursing student beaten to death.
The individual was unconscious and not breathing and had visible injuries.
That night, UGA Police Chief Jeffrey Clark announces there's been an on-campus homicide, the first in nearly 30 years. Students begin reacting to the news.
It feels more heavy-hearted, like the air's not as fluid, there's not as much conversation. I've noticed that there's a lot more people traveling in packs now.
Just everybody's been on edge.
They had no relationship.
The next morning, police hold a press conference announcing an arrest in Riley's murder.
Jose Antonio Ibarra, 26 years of age. He lives here in Athens, but is not a U.S. citizen.
Ibarra, an undocumented migrant from Venezuela, is charged with malice and felony murder, kidnapping, and attempted rape. Our Atlanta News First cameras capture exclusive video of him being taken into custody at his apartment, not far from where Riley's body was found.
We got professors crying in class, telling us how they feel and stuff. I mean, all we can do is pray for each other, hug each other.
On campus, students grieve Riley's death, holding prayer vigils and creating memorials for the innocent young woman. But off campus,
Laken's death is a direct result of failed policies on the federal level.
Political tensions begin to flare.
We the people have had it. This has got to stop. This lawlessness needs to stop.
Riley's murder sparks local and national conversations on U.S. immigration policies. On the campaign trail, President Donald Trump promises mass deportations.
We will begin the largest deportation operation in American history.
Months later, Ibarra pleads not guilty and goes to trial.
The evidence will show that Laken fought. She fought for her life.
The evidence that Jose Ibarra killed Laken Riley is circumstantial.
Prosecutors spend days presenting evidence to the jury, including video footage of Ibarra stuffing bloody clothes and gloves into a dumpster the same day as Riley's murder. The defense seemingly tries to pin the crime on Ibarra's brother Diego, with whom he shared an apartment and is also in the country illegally. But in the end,
Count 1, malice murder, I find the defendant guilty.
Jose Ibarra is found guilty on all charges as Laken's family makes peace with her passing.
He ripped away every beautiful memory we will ever be able to make with her again.
We refuse to let this person rob Laken of the hope she gave to her family, loved ones, friends, and the world as a whole. We will proudly carry this hope on in her name in the days ahead and for the rest of our lives, because together we can all keep hope alive.
Me now to talk more about the moment that this search began and then the months that would lead into a nationally watched trial is Atlanta News First reporter Chelsea Beimfor. Now, Chelsea, you were one of the reporters on the ground when the news broke that there was a murder on a University of Georgia's campus. Walk me through that day.
Yeah, this all unfolded kind of in pieces. So initially, a press release was sent out actually on February 22nd of last year saying that there had been a body, I believe at that point. They weren't calling it a homicide investigation yet, but just that a body had been found on the University of Georgia campus. So I remember there was a press conference held later that night. It was dark outside. The University of Georgia police chief spoke. I believe Madeline Montgomery was actually there initially, and that's when they announced that there had been a murder. This was very uncommon for the University of Georgia. This is the first homicide that they had been investigating on campus since I think the 1980s, so it had been almost 30 years or so, maybe it was the 1990s. So this immediately turned into kind of sheer panic for a lot of people on the campus, a lot of parents, a lot of our viewers that maybe were alumni from the University of Georgia or had kids that attended there, because at that point, that evening, nobody knew what had happened, nobody knew if there was a suspect, and at that point they had not identified the victim yet either. So the next morning, I got sent up to Athens pretty early, and one of our other crews, our morning show crew, was already there, and they had just kind of stumbled upon a big police presence outside of an apartment complex off South Millage Avenue, which, if you're familiar with the University of Georgia at all, that's a long road where there's a lot of Greek life housing, a lot of student apartments, very close to the campus. So they just happen to be driving by. They see this big police presence, Athens Clarke County Police, UGA Police, and they see that several people were detained. So they start filming video of what's going on there, and of course at the beginning, police had not said if this was connected to the murder, but just, journalistic thoughts, put two and two together. This was not far from where the crime scene was. Anyway, so they gathered that video. We're up there that day. The University of Georgia ends up holding a press conference where they announce who the victim is. 22-year-old Laken Riley, who was a former UGA student, was attending Augusta University Nursing School in Athens. University of Georgia didn't have a nursing program at the time, still doesn't. And then they announced in the same press conference that they had arrested a man, 26-year-old Jose Ibarra, who was from Venezuela, was in the country, as they said, illegally at that press conference. So, I think there was some sigh of relief that there had been somebody apprehended so quickly, but then, of course, became an incredibly sad story as we started to learn more about that victim, who's only 22 years old. She had gone out for a run that morning and never came home. And then we can get into details from court, but we now know that her roommates were the ones that initially reported her missing. She had gone out around 9 in the morning for a run. Around 12 or 12:30, they started calling police and said, "This is weird. She never came home."
Really, the story continued to unfold from there. I mean, taking us all the way up to the arrest of Jose Ibarra and his brother as well. Talk about that for a moment with me.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting details in this case. That video that I was talking about that our morning crew had been filming, you could see Jose Ibarra, another man, which turned out to be his brother, and then a female roommate that lived with them all in this apartment complex on South Millage Avenue. And again, during court, months and months later during the trial, it came out that police had found some surveillance video in this area where her murder had taken place, and they saw a man that had, I believe it was an Adidas hat on and like a dark jacket, Hispanic male, and they saw Diego Ibarra walking down the street the next day and pulled him over for questioning, which was the suspect's brother. So they initially thought he may have been the suspect, and they went to his home to search the property, and that's where they ended up finding his brother, Jose Ibarra, inside the apartment. Turned out to have scratches all over him, and when they, took him in for questioning, did the fingerprinting, took the DNA, ended up matching up with, DNA that was found on Laken Riley's body, and other bloody clothing and items that had been found at the scene.
9:58 a.m.
She received a text message from her mother saying, "You're making me nervous, not answering while you're out running. Are you okay?"
Is that text read?
It is not.
Is that text answered?
It is not.
This trial was difficult to watch from the screen, as I'm sure for most of our viewers, but sitting in the courtroom and really immersing yourself with the feeling that was in the air, you got an opportunity to be there for the trial. Talk to me about really the initial moments, the first opening statements, the presentations from the attorneys, and then seeing Jose Ibarra sitting there as well for the first time in months after his arrest.
It was incredibly tense. And the courtroom in Athens was very small. The courthouse was also under construction, so everyone was kind of crammed into this small courtroom, including a ton of media and a ton of Laken Riley's friends and family members. She was only 22 years old. She'd been a student at UGA, so she also had a lot of friends, young friends and roommates that wanted to come and support her family during this time as well. The opening statements, I'm trying to think back, this was in November that this happened, were very powerful from the prosecution. Throughout the course of the trial, the defense was seemingly trying to pin the crime on Jose Ibarra's brother Diego, talking about how they have a similar appearance and that they lived in the same place. They could have been wearing the same clothing, borrowing each other's clothing. But in the end, we know that Jose Ibarra was convicted on all, I think there were 11 charges against him, including felony and malice murder. But the trial was incredibly emotional, and if you go back and watch any of the video, unfortunately, the evidence was overwhelmingly hard to listen to. There was, a lot of mention of DNA and what objects like a rock he used to murder her and strangle her. It was very, very difficult to listen to.
Count 1, malice murder. I find the defendant guilty.
I sentence you to life without the possibility of parole.
When that judge brought down that ruling ultimately, what was the reaction in the room?
There was a huge gasp. I'm pretty sure it was Laken Riley's mother. I mean, it was collective. There were a lot of people that I think were just waiting. That was about a 4-day long trial, so it was 4 days of hell for a lot of people sitting there listening to all these details. So there was a collective gasp, kind of sigh of relief. And then, of course, after that, it shifts to sentencing Laken Riley's family. So they knew that he had been convicted. And then before the sentencing took place, her family had a chance to address the court and address the judge and basically ask for the maximum penalty, which is life in prison without the possibility of parole. And that was really the first time we had heard Laken Riley's family speak publicly in the 9 months since she was taken from them.
On February 22nd of 2024, our family and friends were given a life sentence without a chance of parole. Jose Ibarra took no pity on my scared, panicked, and struggling child.
Was gut-wrenching, heart-wrenching. Her mom and stepfather talked about how they'll never get to see her get married, and she was studying to be a nurse and just wanted to help people. And so she asked the court for the maximum sentence, and that's ultimately what happened.
It really didn't stop there. We talked about legislation making it up to the state level and then the federal level, all the way to President Trump's desk for passing of the Laken Riley Act.
Yeah, it's a small, I'm sure what they would consider to be silver lining in all of this, that her death did ultimately lead to some sort of change. So the Laken Riley Act is essentially if an undocumented immigrant is arrested and or convicted of crime, they get turned over to ICE and are essentially deported. Of course, there's been a lot of immigration discussions over the last couple months on the campaign trail between President Donald Trump and the Democrats. So ultimately, though, this act was just signed into law, I think a week or two ago. And we did just report this week that it was used for the first time, a case in Indiana where a man was found guilty of causing a fatal car accident. And so because he was charged with that crime, Laken Riley Act was introduced, and he was ultimately turned over to ICE and is apparently going to be deported.
Looking back on the timeline from 1 year ago to Saturday will be the 1-year anniversary, actually, knowing how the case played out, how trial played out, and ultimately the signing of the Laken Riley Act. What goes through your mind?
It all went very quickly. She was killed a year ago, and the trial happened within 9 months, and then there's now a new law that's on the books because of all this. So it's interesting how fast it moved. I'm sure that her family probably doesn't feel the same way. I mean, this was agonizing for them. But this is just a story that will stick with me and probably a lot of people for a long time. I'm a University of Georgia graduate, and we have several people on the staff are as well. So this was an interesting story, I think, for a lot of us to cover, that it hit so close to home. I used to live on South Millage Avenue when I was in college, same street where all of this happened. So it's been a lot. UGA has really been in the spotlight, too, and then, we were speaking about change with legislation, but this prompted a lot of change for the university as well. And we've covered several stories. They've pumped about $9 million into increasing security efforts and enhancements across the campus. They added new fencing after this happened. They've added new emergency call boxes. They've added new lights and cameras. They've really taken a reactive but now proactive approach to try and prevent anything like this from happening again.